Have you ever noticed a moment when reality didn't feel wrong exactly? Just slightly mistimed, like you arrived a second too early or too late for your own life? Maybe it happened while standing in line, driving a familiar road, or listening to someone speak. And for no clear reason, you felt a quiet recognition, as if the moment had already been registered somewhere before you were conscious of it. Not a memory, not intuition, something subtler. Most people move past that sensation without stopping, but some don't. Some people feel it linger, turning into a background sense that the world is running on rules no one ever explained. Over the past century, quantum physics has uncovered a hidden reality where events don't fully resolve until specific conditions are met, where timing, information, and context matter more than common sense suggests. This isn't spiritual mythology, and it isn't philosophical comfort. It's a measured confrontation with how quantum consciousness intersects with what we experience as normal life. And if that quiet sense of misalignment has followed you longer than you can explain, there's a reason this matters. Because one overlooked detail changes how all of it fits together, and missing it would mean staying exactly where the confusion began. If that sense of misalignment stayed with you, there's no need to signal it loudly. A small action is enough. A quiet tap here isn't agreement or belief. It's simply a way of marking that this perspective matches something you've already noticed, but never fully named. And staying connected isn't about following a voice. It's about remaining in a shared space with others who recognize that reality has depth most conversations never reach. If you feel inclined, leave a short comment that continues a private thought, starting with something like, "I realized that," or "This made me notice." Not to explain yourself, just to capture the recognition. Because what comes next isn't interpretation or metaphor, it's rooted in observation. In experiments that forced science to pause and reconsider how reality actually settles into place. In 2000, a physicist named Yoon-Ho Kim, working with Marlon Scully's research group at the University of Maryland, ran what became known as the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment. It was designed to test a simple assumption most of us never question, that events happen in a fixed order, and once something occurs, it's settled. In the experiment, individual particles of light were sent through a setup similar to the classic double-slit test. When information existed about which path a particle took, the result looked ordinary, almost dull. But when that information was erased, an interference pattern appeared, as if the particle had behaved like a wave instead. The disturbing part wasn't the pattern itself, but the timing. The decision to keep or erase that information was made after the particle had already been detected. Nothing traveled backward in time, and nothing mystical was invoked. What changed was context. The outcome didn't finalize until the conditions of observation were complete. The observer effect here wasn't about intention or belief, but about what could be known within the quantum field. And this means that you may be living with outcomes that don't fully settle when you expect them to. That familiar frustration of understanding something before it changes, the sense that clarity arrives before resolution, mirrors this exact structure. If you've ever felt caught between awareness and movement, that tension isn't imaginary. It reflects how reality behaves when information, timing, and perception don't align. Many people quietly recognize this without language for it, sensing that consciousness expansion brings awareness faster than certainty. But this experiment is only the first crack in the surface, because the next concept challenges not just when reality settles, but why it sometimes resists settling at all. In the late 1990s, researchers at the HeartMath Institute, led by Roland McCarty, began documenting something that quietly disrupted a long-held assumption in neuroscience, that the brain alone sets the tone for perception and decision-making. By studying heart rate variability, they showed that the heart and brain function as a coupled system, exchanging information continuously through electrical and neurological signals. When this system enters a state they call physiological coherence, patterns in the nervous system become more ordered, reaction time changes, and perception sharpens, not as a belief, but as a measurable shift. And this explains why moments of insight don't always arrive as thoughts first. They often show up as sensations: a sudden stillness in the chest, a brief internal quiet, a feeling that your attention widened without effort. These aren't mystical signals. They're signs that internal signals stopped competing. When coherence increases, the body processes information with less internal noise, and awareness feels clearer before the mind catches up. That clarity can feel physical before it feels mental. You might recognize it as a subtle calm during moments of intuition, or that strange steadiness that appears right before you realize something important. Science describes this as a change in how information is registered, not a change in the external world itself. In terms of the observer effect, this matters because perception determines which details become dominant within the quantum field of experience and which fade out. Consciousness expansion here isn't about gaining power, it's about reducing internal interference. And that has consequences, because once you begin to notice how coherence alters perception, it becomes harder to ignore misalignment, both in yourself and in the world around you. Understanding this doesn't just clarify reality, it prepares you for something heavier, because greater awareness often comes with a quiet emotional cost that most explanations never warn you about. At some point, this kind of awareness stops feeling abstract and starts feeling personal. Not empowering at first, just heavier. There's a quiet cost to noticing patterns that others seem untouched by. You may have felt it as a subtle loneliness, even in familiar rooms, or a hesitation to speak because explaining what you sense feels impossible without sounding strange. Doubt creeps in, not about the world, but about yourself. You wonder if you're overthinking, if you're drifting out of sync, if paying this much attention is somehow a mistake. It isn't dramatic. It's persistent. It shows up as holding back in conversations, as fatigue that doesn't come from effort, as the unease of seeing inconsistencies before they fully surface. Awareness has a way of removing comfortable narratives without offering replacements right away. The ego resists not because it's weak, but because it was built to function inside simpler explanations. When those explanations fracture, something inside you has to reorganize. If this resonates quietly, there's nothing to fix and nothing to prove. Recognition is enough. And while the weight of seeing more can feel isolating, it also hints at something rarely discussed, that understanding the cost of perception is what makes it possible to glimpse what awareness can eventually offer. What begins to emerge from all of this isn't a diagnosis or a flaw, but a reframing. The feeling of being slightly out of step, of sensing more than you can easily explain, doesn't point to something missing in you. It points to something additional. Along this path, we saw how reality itself doesn't behave like a rigid machine. In the delayed choice experiment, outcomes waited for context before settling. In physiological coherence, perception shifted before conscious thought followed. In both cases, nothing mystical intervened, conditions did. Awareness didn't control reality, but it influenced when reality felt complete. If you've ever felt that insight arrives before resolution, or that understanding creates friction instead of comfort, that tension isn't a personal failure. It may be the natural cost of registering more variables at once. A wider field of perception complicates certainty, slows easy answers, and can make belonging feel harder to maintain. This doesn't make awareness superior, and it certainly doesn't make it easy. It removes autopilot. It challenges borrowed narratives. It forces you to live without premature closure. But it also suggests something quietly unsettling. If reality doesn't fully settle until it's perceived, then perception itself becomes part of the process, not a passive afterthought. That idea isn't reassuring, and it isn't complete. It leaves a question hanging. How much of what feels unfinished in your life remains that way, not because it's broken, but because it hasn't fully met its context yet? And that question doesn't end here. It opens into something deeper, something that asks what happens when awareness itself becomes the limiting factor, and why that might matter more than we've been taught to notice. If something settled quietly as this came together, let it register, not as certainty, just as recognition, the sense that what felt scattered now has a shape. Staying connected here isn't about habit or entertainment. It's a deliberate choice to continue in a space meant for understanding rather than distraction. If this way of looking at reality feels worth carrying forward, that gesture matters. The next step in this journey what quantum physics actually says, without the mysticism, presses further on the tension you've just felt, questioning what really changes and what doesn't once awareness is already there. You don't need to decide anything now. Just know the door remains open for when curiosity outweighs comfort. Your consciousness brought you here. What happens now is your choice.